Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing good. This is Anthony with the Dragons of Victory, and I'm very pleased to be talking with Anton and Shonda, who you may have seen on Kevin Non-Tradicath's channel. He's been on his show a couple of times, and Anton's been, been very supportive and encouraging, and he suggested maybe coming on and us talking, and I thought that was a great idea. Um, Anton, pretty much everyone I've talked to or spoken with so far, um, in this journey of mine, having ultimately lost any sense of religious faith, and now I consider myself an agnostic. But it's never been it's always been difficult in a way because uh, I, you know, my faith, my religious experience, and religious experience in general, and the community around me that my faith engendered was very important to me. And ultimately, it just came down for me of I have to live in a way based on what I think is true, and I just came to the conclusion that I don't think what the Catholic Church presents as true is necessarily true, and I think some things in the official teachings are outright dangerous and harmful. But at the same time, I see a huge distinction based on just observation and my own personal experience with the mainstream Catholic Church and traditional Catholicism, and that's been the key distinction here for me is the difference between them. And I would classify traditional Catholicism as destructive and dangerous, whereas for mainstream Catholicism, like I said, I think some of its official teachings are problematic, but at the same time, they mainstream Catholicism for the most part seems to operate in a way where the issues that those teachings have don't necessarily manifest themselves, or they don't manifest themselves to the degree that they do in traditional Catholicism. And I also completely understand that in this world of ours, we're grasping, we're searching for anything to make sense of this crazy world around us. And the I see such importance and such beauty in many religious communities around me, including mainstream Catholics. And so that's why I wanted to talk to you, because you are still a Catholic, but you you support my work and support Kevin's work as well. So before I keep rambling on, just introduce yourself, please, Anton, and tell us all about you.
Sure. Thanks for that awesome introduction, Anthony, and thanks for having me on your channel. I really enjoy conversations like these, and it's for my own journey. It's been really healing and expanding my mind, expanding my heart. So thanks for the opportunity to just kind of shoot the breeze with you, and hopefully we cover some topics that are helpful to both of us, but helpful to whoever tunes in. The Dragon Anton, lifelong Catholic. I probably don't check all the boxes for being a saint anytime in the near or distant future. So I'm definitely not a perfect Catholic, but I'm trying to stick it out. The church has been my home, and spiritually, and in terms of my community, and in terms of the sort of the language and framework that I've used since childhood to make sense of the world. And when I'm not tuning into Anthony or Kevin's uh, videos on YouTube, my day job and is being a pianist. I'm kind of working on grad school, doing classical piano, and that's definitely one of the things in life that gives me joy. And I think it's an informed. I have like a bajillion analogies between music and religion that sort of help me to think through these tough topics. But yeah, to sort of tie it into Anthony's theme here, I think there is there's this deep sense that we are looking for, like, to borrow some of Jordan Peterson's language. It's like we're looking for a kind of structure of meaning and some kind of framework to help us make sense of all of this. And even when a lot of it seems nonsensical or just out of kind of very woo woo spirituality, I think there is an innate tendency in human beings, wherever they are, to sort of grasp or hang on to something and live as if it were true, just because it orients us in a direction. Because I think that indecision between what is, of the many options are presented, what is the ultimate truth and what should I ultimately do and what is the final purpose of life, I think there is a kind of choice paralysis. So at the very least, I think we start where we start, and hopefully we can sort of hang on to what is familiar, just for at least as a starting point. We kind of have to start somewhere. But I find that in the spiritual journey, the hope is we hang on to our values without ever becoming rigid and stale. I think we do have to keep the lines of communication open, and it becomes very dangerous. I think to tie it into what you were saying about the dangers and damages of something along the lines of traditional Catholicism is when you have, key figures. My guilty, I wouldn't say guilty pleasure, but my, let's say my guilty habit is I always pick on Father Chad Ripperger. Just I don't want to, I don't want to, I'm not going to assume his motives. I'd like to think he's a good person. I'd like to think he is trying to lead people in what he thinks is right, but some of the things he says I think can be extremely harmful to people who choose to stay within Catholicism, and it damages their view of people in other cultures. And I think when you sort of cut off the chance for communication because everybody is worshiping demons because they're not in your particular faction of Catholicism, or they're not in your particular liturgy, so they're probably excommunicating themselves because of they're part of some heretical clown mass and the Novus Ordo, or when you're literally any negative emotion or any negative, let's say, bodily or perceived negative bodily impulse is literally demonic activity. I think you completely kill the chance for an honest conversation about what's going on here. What's this cultural framework that's foreign to my own, or what's this, very natural biological response to a certain situation? And I think we need to be able to assess those things without demonizing them and completely cutting off the chance for giving that situation or that person or that perspective the benefit of the doubt. So that was my opening ramble. So hopefully that gives us something to start with.
Absolutely. No, thank you. That was great.
Mhm.
I talking about Chad Rippiger and the stuff that dude says, that would be a whole nother discussion. I've
Yeah.
mentioned some of his craziness on Kevin's channel before, but yeah, but I want to ask you a question, Anton. And so for me, there's two key elements that anchor us in to any faith or belief system. One is believing that it's true, believing that it reflects reality, and two is the personal benefits it brings to us in terms of giving us a sense of comfort, of familiarity, of stability, and of orienting ourselves. So we don't feel like we're wandering around in a desert. We feel like we know where we are, we know what we're doing, and that's very very important. But and I would say that most people don't who are of a faith don't see that distinction, but or don't see them as two separate things. It's all part of the same package for them. But you know, so often for me personally, and I see it with other people too, when you start to really drill down on why I believe these things, why the church teaches these things, people ultimately always run into obstacles or run into issues that they can't rationally explain. They can't rationally say. It all comes down to the experience they have uh, of it. And I've come to learn in studying religion and studying cults and studying belief systems that, you know, a sense, a feeling of euphoria or a feeling of happiness or a feeling of being connected to the universe, of being of understanding the purpose of your life and understanding the meaning of everyone else's life. So often when we feel that way, it's we can't write it down. People have tried to write down, what how exactly I feel right now and why that I know this is truth. But it's sort of like, when you're having a drug trip and you feel like you've unlocked the secrets to the universe and you write it down and you wake up the next morning and look at what you wrote, and it's something like, we need to send all we need to send all the grizzly bears to Poland. You know that like just something, or just not a non sequitur is what you get when you look at it after the drugs have worn off. But in the moment, it is you've hit solid gold. You've unlocked the secrets of the universe, and you're convinced you're practically convinced of that. And so we obviously have to understand the world around us in a rational way, and we have to have a baseline set of principles we all agree on. And for the most part, that's science. That's you know, we have a. It seems to me we have a basic structure of morality and a basic sense of like do unto others as you would do unto you, the golden rule. That's sort of the basic framework we have, but that's just not enough for a lot of people. People need to understand why, and people need to eliminate doubts. You know, people just want to get rid of that voice in their head that questions everything, and they need certainty. But that is so. Without rambling too far, my question for you, Anton, is: do you feel like your faith is what keeps you in it? Do you feel like it more comes from simply believing it's true and discounting, like, doesn't matter how I feel, doesn't matter how anyone else feels, this is just reality, this is the way the world is? Well, or do you think it's more of, you know, you might not be so sure about that instance, but the benefit it gives you personally, and keeps you in, and that's not, I don't mean that in any way to say that that's not a good motive for like, if you don't believe a religion is true, or at least at the very least you can't, you know that you couldn't convince anyone um in a purely clinical rational way of the of these beliefs being true without, you know, them experiencing in some way what you experience. I hope that makes sense, and I just want to ask you where you think you're coming from more on that.
Mm. For sure. That's a really like valid question. And I think that your two categories of like belief in something that's true, as well as like the practical benefits of adopting a certain belief, are two of like the most important factors when you commit yourself to a way of life. Uh I I'll try to keep this coherent because I definitely feel like my own feelings about it are definitely floating around in a lot of gray area. I think fundamentally there's definitely a lot of just habit. It's been with me since youth, you know, and despite my own questions and my own discomforts with X, Y, or Z stuff in the church, I think there's a certain security and comfort in, you know, sticking with the habits that you've known since childhood. But at the same time, there is this, like, you know, I hope this doesn't get me excommunicated, but there is a strong flavor of agnosticism, I would say, in my practice of Christianity, or the way I you know, kind of deal with all of these questions. And it's a very strange place to be in the gray area, because I think in a way, um in some way, I think, you know, at least evaluating the Catholics that I know, I feel like the if we could say that the happiest and most peaceful Catholics are the Catholics that have stopped thinking in some way. And I don't mean that to sound so condescending, but I mean,
I know what you mean. I
yeah,
understand what you mean by that.
yeah, I think it's either you've gone full trad and you just sort of let the church do all the thinking for you. And yeah, you make mistakes and you struggle with, you know, concupiscence is like the big one that they like to throw around. You struggle with this or that, but you know, there's always confession, and that you sort of just keep up with the rituals and you just let them answer the big questions for you and you stay in line. And then the other type of Catholic that stopped thinking, I feel like, would be your more chilled out Novus Ordo Catholic, that it's part of their culture. They go through the motions. They love the
Right.
Christian Eastman, not Christer, sorry, the Christmas and
Christmas and Easter.
Easter. I sometimes
Christer.
jam those two
You
to.
combine them.
Yeah, exactly. You do the Easter celebrations twice a year, and
Yeah.
you know, maybe you try most of the time to make Sunday Mass, and you're bringing your family there, but you're not thinking too heavily about, oh, am I in a state of mortal sin? Am I not? Am I praying enough rosaries and stuff? But it's just more like you're going through the motions because it's part of the local culture, and there isn't so much of the fire and brimstone around it. So there,
Yeah.
because there isn't so much, there isn't this sense of a supernatural gun pointed at your head, you know, always being told about the fire and brimstone stuff. And there's no maybe urgency to have to ask yourself why you believe it. It's just part of your culture. And I find that those are the happiest and healthiest Catholics. You've either shut your brain off in one of the two directions. I definitely find myself somewhere in the gray area where I really I wrestle with the, you know, a variety of topics, but I also recognize that it's given me community. It's given me a vocabulary and a set of values to sort of order my life. And there still is a kind of security in that, and probably somewhere in my psyche, in a way that I haven't figured out how to communicate adequately, there's probably some form of Pascal's wager there. I just haven't sorted it out to be able to like
Yeah,
share it in a short and coherent way.
yeah, exactly. I think that Pascal's wage.
Mhm.
gonna ask you about that. I was gonna say like, so you'd say you're coming at this from a more of a Pascal's wager approach. Gotcha. Well, I was in the same position for a long time. There was a very long time when um I knew deep down I didn't believe this anymore. And there was also a period where I really wanted to, because, you know, in my mind, the implications of what would happen in my life if I were to leave were overwhelming. Um, and yeah, I just started, but it got to the point for me where I just was feeling too much like I was living a lie. And that began to irritate me to the point of, uh, you know, I I just had to, you know, be who I was openly. And you know, but at the same time, everyone is on a different journey and everyone's experience affects them in a different way. So so much even still, despite my attempts to clarify my where I'm coming from here, um I get a lot of, I sometimes I'll get the response, "Oh, you're just anti-Catholic now, or you're just anti-religion, or you hate religion." And I don't hate religion in any way, shape, or form. But you know, a lot of people say today I have a problem with organized religion, and I mean, all religions have to be organized to a degree. But I think a lot what they're getting at is the when you organize, the more you organize it, the likelier it is to become a cult. Is the overall point. The more structured and rigid, like you just talked about, the ideology becomes, and that gets you to the point where you see these kinds of experiences of like the kind of experience you get in church that's like a religious experience, like an epiphany, or just the general which might be a particularly intense momentary thing, or it just might be a generalized sense of community and fellowship and all of that. You know, that is so important for for a life. But um I was trying to say that I think that in the world today, there's I'm getting just editing here. I'm a little I got a little off my train of thought, but just to bring it back here, it's going to happen sometimes. With
No
me,
worries.
I think that religion, organized or not, it's going to be with us until the end of time. I don't think that, you know, I get irritated sometimes with people who say, "Oh, atheists, it's just another religion." You know, it's just it. They say they don't believe, but their god is atheism, or their god is pleasure or money or
Yeah.
whatever.
I have to admit,
Um,
like that's the most intellectually lazy argument I hear from a stereotypically hardcore religious point. Yeah, to say that
it is
to write off atheism as another religion is extremely lazy. It's just an ad
it
hominem.
is it it is, but I would. There's a part of me that understands where they're coming from, because I think all of us need a grounding influence, an orientation, and and in order for that orientation to seem legitimate, to seem firm, to seem solid, in order to eliminate any doubt that it might go away at any second, or we might lose it, you have to have a sense that it's either supernatural or above humanity, right? And that's the issue here. We all recognize at this point that um all, you know, all men are created equal. Well, all men and women, that created equal, that means that, we have equal dignity. But when we get to these really tough questions about greater meaning and the purpose, I realized, we're all operating with the same materials. We're all operating with the same playbook. And in order to take one person's, because there's a for me, I just lost the sense of personal connection, and that's what I was trying to getting. That's what I was getting at here. Um, what grounds you, and what or it's a community that's animated by a belief in this higher power, and the higher power is always presented as loving, as wanting the good for you, as the relationship like a parent and a child, right? And growing when you're growing up in a church, you very and you have a good relationship with your parents, you very quickly learn to associate the relationship you have with your parents with the relationship you have with God. And you know, it was undoubtedly tough in my family when I lost my faith, but I'm still close with them, and I maintained that good connection with them, but I've lost it with I don't have that sense of a love of a familial connection with this God anymore, because I just don't think it's there, because it was always presented to me by the description of this God, what he wants me to do, how he thinks of me, how I should, and therefore how I should think of myself. It was always presented to me by men just like me. And faith is, you have to take a leap and say, I accept that this person was given a supernatural license. And that's how Catholicism sees the Pope, right? He has a supernatural license to tell me about the nature of God. And that's the framework, that's the setup you have to roll with. And I I just lost a sense of feeling that there was anything loving or anything coherent or anything even anthropomorphic, really, or in the structure behind this belief system. And what I mean by not even anthropomorphic is that when you get down to the cult like systems, and especially in trad casts, it's all about the print, it's all about the text, what's written. And if what's written conflicts with what's human, then your humanity is the problem, and it needs to be overcome. And that's the danger. That's where it goes wrong. And but but again, we're left kind of out in the desert at the end of the day if we reject all of these other belief systems. So I don't know. It's a never ending source of frustration for me, because it's like in Fiddler on the Roof, and Tevier is always going to himself on the one hand and on the other hand. So I can let you talk now. I've gone on long enough, but I just what are your thoughts on all of that?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack. Maybe I'll start with a couple. Uh, I'm not entirely sure that these two will connect, but hopefully by the end of my turn to ramble, these two will connect. But I think one thing about the point about mystical experiences is very interesting, and I think relevant. I think there is a as much as people would especially the more traditional leaning people. I think there's almost a kind of resistance towards anything subjective, but I think mystical experiences are very subjective. I think they're very
Right.
much based on emotions, and I think sometimes, especially with the Father Ripperger very legalistic types, emotion is almost a dirty word.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, oh, your emotions are an obstacle to the use of your
Yeah.
intellect and reason. You know, and then emotions are sort of yeah,
Well, could I
dismissed.
respond to that real quick? Not to
Absolutely.
cut you off, but to respond to that real
Hmm.
quick. That's very true that there's a clinic that they approach it very clinical and legalistically.
Hmm.
But at the same time, when you start to challenge them in terms of a factual, like they present something as a fact, and it's
Hmm.
like, well, that's factually not true. Like this, you say this miracle happened, or this. or you saw this, uh, exorcism take place where this guy's climbed up a wall or whatever, and it's like, if that's true, then where's then let's have evidence. That's you have. It's just basic function of life to provide evidence for your claims. We couldn't function if we didn't operate that way.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. Could
when
we
they
have
start to
a
get
could we
challenged
have a
on that,
peer? Oh, sorry. I was just gonna make a joke that can we have a peer-reviewed study that Leviathan is the demon of butch lesbianism? Like, it would be
yeah,
nice to have a
yeah,
few independently corroborated studies.
yeah, exactly. No, we just got to take his word for it that he spoke to this
Hmm.
demon. But all the time, they turn it around and come at you with the threats of hell and the fire and brimstone and the sense of sin and everything, and that is very subjective because in your it's all about how in yourself if you've sinned or not, or if you've done and it's a personal sense of connection to this deity and familiarity, and it doesn't it's incoherent just for them to say that they treat it all legalistically, all dogmatically, and there's no emotion involved, when the fear of eternal punishment or the fear of losing your familial connections or the personal things that will happen to you, that's very much related to emotion. And that's what they use to keep you in. So they do ultimately use emotional tactics in terms of a spiritual threat and all of that to keep
Oh,
you in,
absolutely.
or by making
Hmm.
or trying to evoke in you a sense of I'm a bad person for thinking this. Like
Hmm.
this line of thinking or this line of questioning is immoral,
Hmm.
and that's but go on. I didn't mean to cut you off, but
No,
that's
no,
sort
no,
of
no
the
worries.
contradiction I
It's
see
yeah,
there.
it's totally no, totally. It helps to have the exchange, just so this interaction just adds multiple layers to these topics for sure. But yeah, I
Yeah.
do think that you're absolutely right. Like I was just discussing with a few friends earlier, that one of the greatest obstacles to that line of Catholicism is that they do kind of violently snatch away your sense of private safety. You're not safe in your own brain. If you're a traditionally married person, you're not safe in your own bedroom, because any number of things could get you in trouble there, even if you're a married heterosexual. um and it's just that I think that sense of taking your safety and security away is definitely an appeal to emotion, kind of clothed in this legalistic language, but it is still fundamentally
Right.
emotional. But to tie it into something interesting I came across in a music class a few years ago, there were some studies actually that they were doing brain studies of Pentecostals speaking in tongues, and then a brain study of people listening to their favorite music, and the same area of the brain is firing up. So there's a whether and I think there have been comparable studies as well of people who do substances like shrooms, and it fires a very similar, or if not identical, area of the brain. And I don't mean to dismiss or discount mystical experiences, whether it's religious, it's drug induced, or it's artistically induced. But I think it is very fascinating when we include an understanding of the human brain as being the common denominator in all of these mystical experiences. And maybe it's that experience, that human experience, just points into something that's beyond our understanding, but there is a
Mhm.
very strong subjective element to mysticism that we can't discount for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking for myself, I've been doing a lot of like hard thinking about my own experiences in religion. I can't honestly say that I've had any mystical experiences. As a musician, I certainly have a lot of what might qualify as mystical experiences within the area and experience of performing and listening to music, and that's something I'm just like, it's a very unique level of deep human feeling. And I'm sure you feel the same thing with like acting and theater. There must be some kind of equivalent there of some kind of mystical experience where it puts you in
All
touch with.
kinds of things.
Yeah, it
Um,
just. Yeah.
I would like to be a better musician because I love
Hmm.
music. But part of me has struggles with learning language, just the way my brain works. And learning music is very much, I think that you use the same, it's very much like learning a language,
Oh yeah,
learning
absolutely.
music and stuff. So
Hmm.
just the technical aspect of music, uh, and also I started to get this sense of which is it's a stupid idea, but a reason it's been so hard for me sometimes to study music, or like a mental barrier, is that when I start to focus on, the F and the G and the F
Hmm.
and the G, and focus on the technical aspects of it, that sort of like it triggers like the mechanic side of my brain. Not a mechanic in any way, shape, or
Hmm.
form, but that kind of like tool use kind of thing, and that works, and that almost makes me feel like the value, the experience of the music, or the power of the music is decreased or cheapened in some way, because I'm seeing the mechanics behind it. And that's, I know that I can, that's not how I'll feel when I master guitar or master piano someday. We'll see. Um, but uh, but that's how I feel at it's, getting up to it. But anyway, that's a whole separate
Yeah.
thing. When you study religions and cults and high control groups, you realize that, going back to, mechanism, there's actually mechanics to inducing mystical experiences in people. It even goes to like therapy and hypnotism. To get hypnotized, you've got to be perfectly still. You've got to follow a rhythm and everything, and and that's music too, right? A beat, the beat, in music, um, determines the emotion that the music brings. And different styles of music reflect different kind of, you know different emotions, different ways of seeing the world, and different attitudes. And so, especially in traditional mass, it's structured very much to make you as susceptible as possible and open to those experiences. It's very The traditional mass is extremely structured, and you're meant to, it's all very solemn. It's all very serious. The attitude that you have to maintain is, this is the most serious thing happening in the world right now, because to them it is. And the standing up, sitting down, kneeling, standing up, sitting down, kneeling, the long stretches of silence, the smells and the bells, as they put it. It's it's structured specifically to and make you receptive to whatever's being said or whatever being told to you. So, I know very much that these the, listening, when I would show people recordings of, the priest who hurt me, saying insane things, they listen to these recordings and be like, "What? He said that?" But I remember sitting with these people as he's in church saying these exact same things, and being receptive, and all of us leaving church like, "Wow, that was amazing. That was so, you know, uh powerful what he said, and I never thought it like I never thought of it that way, but wow, when he's presented to you, when you hear these words, or you hear what this priest says in the context of this whole, of everything else going on around you, you're primed for it. You're not in a questioning or critical frame of mind at all, which you are when you're, in your own home, or out and about, just living your life, and listening to these statements just as is. And that's so important here, is, and that goes to all of this. Every belief system has to have a ritual, and a pattern, and a drum beat, to make the ideas stick, you know
Oh, for sure. I think exactly what you said. I think so much of religion and so much of the ritual, especially with the traditional mass, because it's the choreography of the traditional mass is much more complicated than your run of the mill Novus Ordo mass. There are a lot more layers, and yeah, like the exactly as you put it, the smells and bells, and the certain environment and atmosphere created by Gregorian chant. It does. It really makes the religious experience quite literally embodied. It's not just listening to a lecture, but it is, you're an active participant in the whole process, and that
but would
makes
you
you.
say that there's an element of manipulation there?
I think it can be used for manipulation. I think so much about manipulation does depend on intent. And I think the one thing that I'm trying to work out is I'm not even though we've been discussing how elements of tradition can be very damaging and very in a way stunting of emotional and intellectual growth and an ability to have good faith dialogue with others that are not in your tribe. Even though there is that, I really don't have an answer, but I don't know how much of this is intentional manipulation and how much of it is sort of like we've inherited this framework and it's sort of become automated, that we're subservient to this framework and we don't even know that we're sort of taking on a manipulative approach because it's just something that's been passed down. And it's almost like this system of dogma and doctrine is it's almost a type of artificial intelligence because we're not permitted to think outside the lines. I don't know that father so and so at the highest ranks of the traditional priesthood is actively manipulating the congregation, or he's just genuinely convinced that this is the one and only way and it's his solemn duty to get people on the correct path.
Well, yeah, the intent is important, but at the same, so, you know, assessing the intent of people 2,000 years ago is pretty difficult. But the a problem with tradition I see is that it perpetuates this practice and these attitudes, and the effect is still there regardless of intent.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's a cycle, so you operate within this framework that you were handed down through from traditionally, right? And you hold on to that framework because it was traditional, because it's your grounding, anchoring influence. But again, stepping outside it and analyzing it from a bird's eye view, um, you often resist that because you start to you start to have questions, you start to see things you can't explain and can't make sense of, but then that threatens the security you have, right? So I would say that perhaps very perhaps there might be almost no bad intent whatsoever within any of these people. They might be totally convinced, but that's not a reason to say, oh well, then keep on doing what you're doing.
Oh, for sure. I think
Keep
there's
this up, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
I agree. I would agree with that.
Because the intent is ultimately, um, you know, I don't want to say ultimately it's selfish with all this, but what I mean by saying it's selfish is, you know, you you think about, is this part is this thing I'm part of doing good? Is it helping people or hurting people? Is it doing both? Maybe, but you got to weigh the balance. And if you were to start to think in your head, maybe this is hurting people more than it's helping. Maybe this is overall a bad entity. The personal consequences might keep you back, but you're keeping yourself in this destructive belief system framework at the end of the day for your own benefit. And I think that the how to live morally is to have concern for the well-being of those around you. Um, and then of course they would say, well, that's how we're showing. Well, in their mind, of course, the people in these high control groups called. I often find that high control group is sometimes a good thing to replace the word cult with because cult is so loaded and everything.
Yeah,
But
I
these
understand.
high
It
control
can
groups,
accidentally be a
um,
sloppy term, but high control group is very precise.
yeah, high control groups, they might have 100% pure intentions, and 100% of them might be convinced that this is what they're doing is for the good. But the effects and the damage is still happening and present, and emotional, spiritual, psychological, physical, all kinds of damage that these groups produce. And so, um, but that's not at all where I see you coming from on and all this, and that's why I'm willing to talk to you because so many of these hard. There's also at the same time though a strain of people in these high control groups who relish the power and the position that it gives them. and that's what motivates them, and that's
No,
a
for sure.
motivation where you can clearly see the the narcissistic,
Hmm.
because narcissistic people um thrive pretty much every narcissist dream is to be a cult leader,
For sure, and
or
that coin culture
yeah.
of clericalism that you pointed out lends itself there because they like you said, that we're primed to accept the authority without question, and that really puts them in a position within their social group that they can conceal a lot of nastiness.
Right, exactly. And so I guess I can ask you, um, in this journey you're on, and you said you're coming from at this not at all in the sense of like I know what's right and the rest of the world needs to get with the program. You're very much on a personal journey of discovery and finding your own meaning, and more power to you. And you were raised in the Catholic Church, so the Catholic Church is that source of your security. I'm not in any way trying to discourage you or anyone else from not continuing to be a mainstream Catholic. Um, and trad Catholics say Novus Ordo Catholics, but I try to not play their game and use their terms as much as possible. So I'll just say mainstream. But um, in terms of the church you're a part of, I want to ask you this: where do you see it going as someone on the inside? Because I still follow everything that's going on in the church. It definitely seems that trad cats are the loudest voice, but they also they do seem to be, in terms of the Vatican not having the Vatican itself not having very much influence, not having very much power, but they do have a lot of power and influence in sort of the far right, um, right wing world of politics, and so many traditional priests get elevated, and traditional Catholic figures get elevated on the far right. So, you know, which do you see the church continuing in the direction it's going, or do you see perhaps? Am I wrong? And do you think the trads might actually be more ascendant and gaining more power? Just because you have an inside perspective.
That's a really good question. Well, just to briefly kind of summarize my own childhood church experience in the church that, like at home in California, I grew up in a parish that more and more I appreciate that its success is due to the fact that it hit an interesting midpoint. It certainly embraced certain elements of the Second Vatican Council, and it was using the Novus Ordo format, but in a very reverent way. You have communion patens, male only altar servers and lectors, organ only music, incense, elements of Latin. So it also had elements of the traditional Latin mass, and I think it struck a midpoint. Um, it was conservative enough for people with trad tendencies, but it also spoke of God's love and mercy, and it had that softness around the edges that Vatican II inspired.
Yeah,
And I think that's why in a way it's a political language. It's at least center right, if not right leaning in the spectrum of mainstream Catholicism. Um,
yeah,
and in terms of just evaluating that, especially putting that church in the context of stereotypically very liberal and progressive California, and it's got massive numbers. So I think in some ways the strength of the church as an organization needs to rely on a healthy balance between there's a certain amount of strictness and structure, just because I think human society depend so much on structure, but you need that appeal of love and mercy and welcome. I think you can't lose track of that, so at least evaluating it from a practical point of view. And now in terms of like the future of the church, it's really tough. This is the most uncertain I felt about it, just because I think in the last year and a half, and especially like more broadly, like after COVID, after the lockdowns, I just realized how much there's resentment against um you know everything that came after the Second Vatican Council. I didn't realize that the splits within the church between trads and the mainstream was this deep, like the rift. It's sort of kind of forced me to reevaluate what my sense of the Catholic spectrum of thought and theology is. It's so much different than what I thought. I'd never thought in my life that I would hear Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI be called modernists. Like
Yeah.
I always thought that they were, reasonably conservative. Maybe, and in the case of Pope Benedict, I thought he was quite conservative. I mean, a very soft-spoken, sympathetic man, but I
Mhm.
always thought but for some to call him a modernist is wild. Like it sort of forced me to rethink Catholicism, and the wounds are so deep. And I spend an ungodly amount of I well not so much recently, but in the last year, I've tried to cut down my time on Twitter just because it can be pretty draining on your
Well,
mental health.
I
But
got rid of mine. I know
yeah,
once Elon bought it and started
mhm,
making it
yeah,
and I didn't use it all that much before
yeah,
he bought it anyway, but
yeah.
I just don't
You're
bother
a
with it now.
wiser man
So
for it. You're a wiser man for it
yeah,
for sure. But yeah,
I mean,
I
I just
really
use
yeah.
Facebook, Instagram, and
Hmm.
TikTok, and it's going fine
Yeah,
so far.
that's good. But yeah, I think in terms of the future of the church, it's tough because I think it's a really sad reality, but um I am seeing that. I think one of the reasons trads are so strong uh is that element of structure. And there's two things. I think the one thing that you brought up astutely was it's just a sad reality of human nature. We respond so much to fear and the need for security and the need for control. Whether you're a traditional Catholic or you're a sort of a hyper materialist, everything is science and evidence, the thing with those two extremes is the need to exercise control over reality. And it's just a difference in approach, whether you take a hyper spiritual approach or a hyper materialist approach. It is that need for control and security. And I think that
Yeah.
that fear response is so strong in our nature. And I think the
Hmm.
other thing too, specifically, at least thinking about it in an American context, because I've gotten in touch with some people like in Europe that are at an FSSP parish, but man, it's a day and night difference. The way they describe their FSSP parish, it's day and night. Like they have all the the traditional Latin mass kind of beauty and formula, but there's none of this fire and brimstone stuff.
Yeah.
It's a much more welcoming environment. It's not so heavy handed in the way that the Sensus Fidelium YouTube channel is. So I think part of what we're experiencing with traditional Catholicism is a product of the American society. And I think it's also a reaction to, with everything becoming so multicultural, multilingual, and immigration is happening faster, and we're forced to coexist with various cultures, various languages, various mentalities and spiritual traditions. And I think one way to approach that is to, what, I'm comfortable with my beliefs, but I also want to have conversations with my neighbor. I want to borrow language from Bishop Robert Barron. One of the aspects of sin and hell as a state of being is when you turn yourself inwards. And I think it's what you said, that how there's a certain element of trad spirituality that's selfish, and another word that I would use is it's tribal. It's about my salvation, my security, and the security of my immediate circle, and the salvation of my immediate circle. Let's exclude data, experiences, perspectives that threaten the
Right.
stability of our narrative. And I think you do. I think in a broad social sense, you do have to turn yourself outwards. Like we're living with black, brown, yellow, east, west, Hispanic, Asian, Eastern European, indigenous, various people everywhere, and we do have to connect with our neighbor. We can't just kind of put our head in the sand and ignore that we're all of the same flesh and blood. And to use standard Catholic language, we're all children of God, and we can't just sort of dismiss people's experiences and their points of view because it threatens the narrative that we have a death grip on. We're just hanging
Yeah.
on for dear life, and we can't afford any kind of threat to our sense of spiritual security. And I think we do need to. And I think that's something that Pope Francis seems to represent. I think it's still everything is still too fresh. I would certainly hope that the Pope Francis approach is what sort of takes over in the long term. But at least, speaking in an American context, I wish I had a more definite answer for you, but everything just feels like a hot mess.
Well, yeah, definitely. And you know, human humanity's a hot mess, right?
Hmm.
But the whole point of these groups is to elevate us above humanity, or elevate us um to a higher plane, and I like I said, I'm agnostic, but I sometimes subscribe, if the closest thing I can have to a spiritual belief is sort of this panpsychist as above, so below feeling, where I feel like the universe might be conscious, and it might be some kind of entity that we're living in, but we're a reflection of it. I mean, it says, in the Bible that God created man in his image and likeness. I've always struggled with that because it's like image, okay, does God, I mean, we always depict he's in our image, so that's where we go to, but our likeness, um the whole point of this seems to be like we're not like him. And of course, original sin, separated us from him. And if it was even possible for us to commit original sin, well, that's not us being in God's likeness either. And yeah, I mean, to me, faith means trust, essentially, and you trust people. um I don't have to trust gravity because gravity is just a fact, right? So I don't I wouldn't say I trust the law of gravity. I would say I know the law of gravity, or I accept the law of gravity,
Yeah,
right?
and because you experience it like very directly. Like
Yeah, I
you don't
experience
have
it.
time.
But
You don't have time to make decision about gravity. I can push you over, you lose
yeah,
your balance, and you experience gravity right there.
right, yeah. It's
Hmm.
gravity is just an intrinsic part of my life, of my
Hmm.
experience. But people change. People say one thing and do the other thing. Um, people don't. We don't operate. We can't real. I mean, we can have psychology. We can have anthropology, social studies. We can and we can study the brain. We can, and the body. We can understand the mechanics of our lives pretty well, but there's that that chasm of we get to the point, but we still have this lack of, we still seem to haven't found a sense of meaning or purpose and everything. And I've kind of wondered, it's like, well, I've just been thinking of the totality of human history and thinking, well, maybe that's just, like, um like I don't know, like bees, for example. Bees, when they sting you, they die. um I don't know if the bees are all talking to each other like, how can we sting people and not die? How do we do that? And they're just desperately figuring out ways to how to sting people and not die. But that's just the way bees are. And so maybe for humanity, we are just, it is just intrinsic to our nature to have this, to grasp for something that's not actually there, but we're still going to keep grasping for it because that's just what we do. And I to some people that's a nihilistic and pessimistic out viewpoint, but that gets back to the question of emotion, right? Because when I so often when I make these criticisms, or when I challenge these ideas, the response ultimately boils down to, well, are you just a nihilist? Like, do you believe in nothing? And it's like, I genuinely recoil at that, because that's not how I see myself. I don't see myself as a hopeless person or a person in despair. I see the world as very exciting, and life is very exciting, and good, but horrific, traumatic, awful things are intrinsically woven into our lives as well. And I'm getting a little too deep into the philosophy, and out into fairyland here, and we should keep this grounded. But basically, to bring that all back, I'll just ask you, what do you think? What is one specific thing that you wish the church? Is there something that you wish the church would change? Like, if you had a magic wand and you could say, I would change this one thing about church teaching, it would be this. And the reason I ask you that is because, this is you creating your own fantasy world. And of course, for many trad Catholics, for many Catholics, trad or not, they'll say, well, it doesn't matter what I think or how, I'm just following God, I'm just obeying God. And again, I don't see it as obeying God, because I see this as just coming from men who claim to speak from God. But the reason I ask you that is, if there was one thing potentially that you wish you could change, that would end this conflict in your head that would put you perfectly at peace with the environment you're in, what would that be?
Oh, that's a really big question. Thanks. And I've actually really been like thinking about it, and
Because for
surprisingly
me,
the
it'd be the
answer.
sexual ethic. I can just say that right now. I think the
That's
sexual
yeah.
ethic of the Catholic Church, even when you get down to the way it is right now, it's just destructive. Um,
Yeah,
and I don't think
I yeah.
there's any way around
Hmm.
that without changing it. So for me, if the Catholic Church just changed their sexual ethic, I mean, it would mean that, you know, a lot of people would leave because they'd be like, well, God changed everything, so it wouldn't work, obviously. But for me, that's would be the key issue here,
Hmm.
of that. But what else for you?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I just want to say two things. One, I think if you're down sometime in the future, I think sexual ethics is like a completely other episode that we could do. I think that's just something
Oh yeah, for sure.
I've been thinking about it so much, and I think there's so much to unpack there. And I share a lot of sympathy with your point of view, and I listened to your discussions with Kevin around that. I think there's so much to unpack there. Two is
Thank you.
kind of a two is a plug for my friends Craig and Jonah, who run the Uncharted Catholic Man podcast, and they've been slowly expanding, and they sort of occupy a similar area. I would say that they're more um, I think they're better Catholics than I am, and I'm not just saying that to be cheesy, but they're faithful Catholics, but they also struggle with the sexual ethic and the whole the sort of the under the, what grounds their podcast is they're married men with kids, and they're really struggling with a lot of details of the Catholic sexual ethic, but they're struggling within the church, and they're trying to make sense of things. And I think especially for people that are struggling within the church or trying to understand from an outsider perspective, I think that they really promote healthy conversations to really not just blindly accept the sexual ethic, but also not kind of take the easy way out and just completely mock it. I think there's wrestling, like what can we appreciate about it, but what is problematic from an emotional, psychological, and practical point of view about the church's sexual ethics. So Uncharted Catholic Man, check those two out, Craig and Jonah. It's a great podcast. But yeah, going back to your question, what would I change? Honestly, it would be I would make sure I wish that universalism wasn't a heresy. I know that we're permitted to be hopeful universalists that all may be saved, but we're not allowed, technically speaking, if you want to play it by the book, we're not allowed to believe that hell is temporary, because hell is eternal conscious torment and stuff. I would
So the eternal
absolutely
punishment
remove.
thing would be what you
I
would
would.
change.
I would absolutely change that, because I think
Yeah,
once you remove the supernatural gun pointed at people's heads, then we can have honest conversations about you know things that are spiritually beneficial and uplifting, and what's really good for society, and what helps us reach our fullest potential, what is harmful, and what should we avoid, what are things that create a society structured around love, compassion, and taking care of the least of us, instead
yeah,
of these. I think there's I'm sorry to say, there's so much useless debate about, like, oh, which version of the Bible is correct. Should we venerate the Blessed Mother as the intermediary between humanity and Jesus, or is this non-biblical? Is transubstantiation a literal thing, or is that just are we just trying to describe a phenomenon we can't quite understand? Which church is
yeah,
correct? Are all other cultures like worshiping demons? I feel like I'm sorry to say that there's so much like these almost useless theological abstractions that we feel the need to debate, because if we don't believe the right thing, we go to supposedly we go to hell. And it's a very similar thing with the sexual ethic.
yeah,
We can't find the healthiest way to come to terms with our desires, our natural desires. And sometimes we act out our desires in not so healthy ways, but in other ways, there is very natural things that we demonize because we're afraid of going to hell. And I think that all of this fear and this fire and brimstone is the biggest impediment to just having wholesome conversations about where should we go as a church community, where should we go as the larger society of people of many different cultures and races. And I do think that fear, that hell-based fear, is probably the biggest obstacle that I see right now.
you know what? That's a really good answer, and it does kind of tie in with my answer as well, because the idea that you know loving who you love, or fulfilling your own sense of personal identity, or maybe deciding that you made a promise to be with someone but you didn't, but this person, you know betrayed you, or they weren't who they presented themselves to be, and to, divorce them and find someone else. The idea that for any of those things, like, divorce, being gay, whatever, all their sexual ethic, the idea that any of those things warrants eternal punishment for that's where I strongly, say, and of course, it's like the fact that this even exists at all, that the idea of eternal punishment is in any way coherent with an infinitely loving God is a objection. But the only response they have is like, well, that's your pride talking. That's, and it's, again, it's trying to make
Yeah.
you feel bad, like you're that's your pride talking. You think you're smarter than God. God's, but again, I'm sorry, I just, it's like cosmically, like I can't, like, I don't, it's cosmically unjust for simply loving who you love to warrant eternal punishment, and there's no viewpoint I can see where it wouldn't be. uh and at the same time, though, like, I remember watching, so when the Parkland school shooting happened and the trial for the kid who did it was going on. They had a victim impact statement where all the parents of all the murdered kids, expressed their anger and their hatred towards the individual who murdered their children, and many of them who, were, you know pastors, or like, some of them were pastors or religious, were telling, this, how much they hopes he burned in hell and how much he suffers for the rest of his life. And in that instance, the someone who murdered your child and someone who ruined your life, for no reason, and permanently damaged your peace and your joy, and took all that away from you. The idea, and all of us, have been personally hurt in all kinds of ways, um, by people who seem to act simply out of sheer evil, simply out of hatred for humanity. We can all think of instances like that. The idea that there's no cosmic justice, that they end up, when they die, they end up the same place we do, like that, we all just evaporate. Um, you know, I'll admit this is coming from just a deep, a purely personal level here, but people like Hitler and Stalin and people, Mao Zedong, all these people who were, just will forever be known as the monsters of history. There does seem to be this sense of there needs to be justice. There needs to be some kind of justice for them. But if we're going to be honest here, and follow, and if I'm going to be honest here, I don't think these people. I do think that, as far as I can tell, when you die, it's like it's like going to sleep forever. And I think that we do end up the same place as these people. But the memory of their misdeeds, the permanent attachment of their name to evil lives on, and that's a kind of hell. And that to me does sort of, you know fulfill that need for justice, to have your name permanently associated with evil. But for a lot of people, they want this person to suffer. And again, part of the Christian ethic, is forgiveness and loving your enemy, and loving and forgiving those who've wronged you, which, but you also can't forgive on someone else's behalf at the same time. You can't say, I forgive you for what you did to that person. No, that person has to forgive. So you don't have the right to do that. And so
Hmm.
often people will say, like, well, I forgive them for what they did to that person. Well, that's not a thing. And you know, I so therefore I I don't in any I completely understand all these Parkland parents' reaction and their words. There was no part of me that was thinking, oh, like, that's not like, I was completely on their side, completely 100% on board with them. And so that gets me to the question of, well, do I think there should be a hell in that case? Like I don't know. I don't. It's the desire for justice and for wrongs to be righted. I very much side with and understand, but you know that again, that instinct, I think, is what crashes is what gets this train off the track. You know,
Mhm.
because the more you feed into that sense of I divine, you turn into a trad Catholic, right? You turn into a cult member. You turn into the world's police or the world's judge, and again, we're just all humans on the same level here, and so that's the conundrum that I have.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the human instinct for justice, and it's such a tragedy. Like whether you're talking about the Holocaust, Stalinism, Maoism, the Parkland, that's atrocious and horrendous, absolutely. And I don't want like the hope for universalism to diminish that. And there should be justice. I think the question just becomes: is that justice eternal flame and eternal conscious torment? I think one of the
Yeah,
best articulated sort of defenses of a universalist point of view is that if every single human had the capacity to know the truth, goodness, and beauty of God, it might be a painful process, it might take a while, but it would fix whatever is defective about us. And it's sort of like a more of a purifying flame rather than this vengeful punishment for all eternity. And I think I would hope that, going back to that question of if we could change the belief in hell, could we change it in the sense that we're all just pursuing what is true, good, and beautiful? Because I do think that if you're operating from a place of fear of punishment, I think it does impair your ability to think clearly, and you can't genuinely pursue the true, the good, and the beautiful, because now
absolutely.
you're just in a kind of survival mode. Like, oh, I don't want to go there. I don't want to mess up. I don't want to like be in trouble.
Yeah,
But I think it liberates you to really pursue the highest form of truth. Um, and yeah, I think in the case of the the Hitler types and the Parkland shooter types, that is one of those aspects of humanity that's so paradoxical. Like, how does someone reach a place where they can so coldly inflict massive amounts of harm? That's beyond. I don't know. That's one of the aspects of human nature that's just I. It's so difficult to account for why that
yeah.
happens. And I would
Well,
hope that there's
yeah.
there's some way, there's some divine way that even such a horrifying human being could somehow be repaired, or and then it might be a long, painful process. But I would hope that it's not just eternal punishment, but there's a purification process, and on even on the other side, that someone as insanely evil as Hitler can somehow something out of that could be fixed, some kind of goodness out of that man could be salvaged. Was there any moment, and I would imagine that even he must have been kind to his own mother at some point, or kind to a friend, before he became this raging anti-Semite, genocidal maniac. Like, there must have been
Well,
some
even after
instances
he
of
was
good.
kind to Eva
Hmm.
Braun, you
Yeah,
know,
I think
and
there's got to be some kind of good that's salvageable from someone as horrifying as Hitler.
mhm. Yeah, so yeah, I get you there. I get you there. I think, but overall, that was a great answer. I wasn't trying to nitpick it to
Yeah.
death. I was just trying to, uh, you know, come with
Hmm.
my take on it. I know you got, we've got a few like maybe 20 minutes left, but
Yeah.
don't want to keep
Yeah,
you
for
like
sure.
right up until the end. So we can probably wrap this up. This has been a great conversation. Thank
Yeah,
you
I've
so
I've definitely
much
enjoyed it.
for doing
Yeah.
this.
Mhm.
Some final thoughts I have are just, you know, appreciate Anton coming on because I want to start emphasizing that, you know, my approach here is I'm not necessarily I am presenting a problem and I'm not in any way offering a solution and I'm not pretending to. And the problem I'm presenting is traditional Catholicism is cult-like and abusive. Um, the harms of being involved in it far outweigh the benefits, and I would just say nobody out there should join a traditional parish. But at the same time, I can't go so far as to say that nobody should that you're it's bad. Nobody should be a Catholic or nobody should join any religion because I still have that existential angst and I see the value in it so much. And even if I don't think the the beliefs, the structure of the belief system is based in truth, I think clearly it's based in there's some truth in there in the sense that it's you can see the positive benefits in terms of a community, in terms of people's lives having a sense of purpose and meaning. And it's undoubtedly true that, you know, when you studying the mechanism of the world, you can know it down pat. You can know it 100% if you study the sciences or whatnot. But it's not going to fill it's probably not going to fill that hole at the end of the day. But what can? And so I just, you know, I just think that the world of cults and the world of one can lead to the other, but they're also very distinct and separate. And you know, your experience of faith, from all I can tell, is very positive for you, and it's despite questions you have and despite doubts, it's still holding you in, which was the case for me for a long time. And so, yeah, I mean, empathy is, I think experience is the best educator, and also empathy as well. If you couldn't ever possibly experience what someone else did, try your best to understand it. And therefore, um, I like to think of myself as an empathetic person. I like to think of myself as a person who cares about the well-being of others. I always try to be. And I know that religion is an intrinsic part of the well-being of others for so many people. And I still wrestle with its absence in my life in many ways. So for everyone who is tuning into the Dragons of Victory, I just hope this conversation and more conversations that I have, you know, I am presenting a problem and I'm not presenting a solution, but these discussions are my best attempt to arrive at whatever. And once again, I appreciate you, Anton, very much for coming on, and we need to do this again.
Yeah, I'm really thankful for the opportunity, and I will echo your kind of sentiment that these kinds of conversations are definitely I think they are a source of hope. I think the I think reaching across all the divisions that we have is it's more effective than a rigid dogmatic mindset for sure. That's my take.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Check out Anton's channel too, where you can listen to all his music. And if you want to learn piano, send him a message. So thank you, Anton. Any last little shout outs or anything to declare?
Yeah, sure. I'll come up with a few closing thoughts. I thought like your summary was already so good, so but I'll try not to ramble on too long. But let's see. Um,
Speak now, forever hold your peace.
yeah, I know it's so much pressure. Yeah, I just think that we live in a really unique time, especially thinking again as someone that's still technically in the church. That I think we have so much access to information to refine our knowledge of theology and church history, which gives us a deeper understanding of the inner mechanisms of the church. But we also have so much knowledge to gain and explore about other cultures, and I think we really do need to expand our the boundaries of our knowledge to understand across divisions and beyond our own sphere. And I think one of the great challenges in the church right now is because the laity is so much more literate, or at least has greater potential than any time in history to be literate. It sort of upsets the balance of power of who can influence the future of the church. And I do think, and
Yeah,
I don't mean this in a way that's sort of, rebellion for the sake of rebellion, but I do think that much of the clergy is so, by design, disconnected from the day-to-day lived experiences of the laity. And I do think that the laity need to step up and help to reevaluate our theology, because
yeah,
things that these well-meaning clerics are saying from their ivory towers are having very real-world practical influences, whether you're talking about sexual ethics or whether you're talking about cross-cultural relations and negotiations. I do think that people in these enclosed communities, whether they're clergy or they're trads that sort of stay in their bubble, find a non-religious friend, find a friend from a different religion, be friends with someone who's gay, be just really open yourself up to people from different backgrounds and different mindsets, because you'll soon realize, and this happened to me, like, even though I wasn't trad, I was a pretty conservative homeschooled kid, and I will say that once you really allow yourself to be vulnerable and be friends with people that you think you have no common ground with, you will soon realize that we're all human beings, and there's so much that we share, and we it's so easy to judge a caricature in your head of what, this is what atheists are, this is what gay people are, this is what non-Catholics are. But when you actually befriend people, you realize that you've been attacking caricatures, and it's a much more complicated, colorful, sometimes problematic, but hey, we'll work through it together.
Yeah.
It's such a much more complicated situation, and I think what is most healing and productive is let's like hit pause on the preaching and let's just understand each other for a sec.
Yeah. I like that. Hit pause on the preaching. And I also like to say nuance is beautiful.
Hmm.
And yeah, well, that was awesome, Anton. Thank you so much for the kind words, and everyone else out there. Thank you for watching. I hope you fly away to victory with us.